Hey guys, it's Pineapple and I want to talk about this week's chapter of My Hero Academia, which is chapter 336. The chapter is available officially out right now, so let's just dive in and talk about it. So the chapter starts off with Bakugo pretty much explaining all the things that he's learned from the Endeavor training arc that we saw in My Hero Academia Season 5. The focus of that arc pretty much is Endeavor teaching Bakugo, Deku, and Shoto how to use their quirks in a more efficient way. Now, if you remember, for Bakugo, his part back then was to pretty much learn how to build up and release his explosions. And at the time, he did kind of get a bit of a speed boost by learning how to compress his explosions themselves, right? And then use the energy from those compressed explosions to go further and faster. But in My Hero Academia's War Arc, we did see that he had somewhat of a quirk awakening where he pretty much learned how to do exactly what he's going to be talking about doing in this chapter, which is his new cluster upgrade. And cluster pretty much allows him to take the individual beads of sweat, right, and compress them into spears. Instead of there just being like sweat coming from his hand, let's say, when you sweat, you kind of have like, it's just going to come out, wherever it comes out. It's not coming out in little balls or little beads or like in any specific way. It's just coming out of your hand. And what Bakugo has pretty much learned how to do is take the actual sweat that comes out of his hand and compress it into little tiny balls and let it build up in a way that when he compresses it, builds little tiny, very packed balls of sweat that he can then ignite and explode to a much, much better effect. So pretty much it's an all-around total upgrade for Bakugo that makes everything better, because it's a new methodology for how he makes explosions in the first place. But Bakugo tells us that pretty much using it demands that he sweats a lot, so he has to wear his winter outfit, and since it's not really winter anymore, it's kind of, probably a little bit of a trade-off in like how long he could fight versus now how effective he is in that smaller window. From there we see Shoto doing a little bit of, we talked about it in the spoilers, but Shoto's doing kind of like it says that he's trying to pretty much make both sides into one, right? But there's a lot of different ways that you could interpret that. And my interpretation of that has always been that if Shoto was ever going to try to fuse both sides together, we would get some sort of like steam release or something like that. But I think if the effort is to try and make it so that he can't be burned by Dabi or that he could defend himself by Dabi, I think the smartest strategy would be for him to try to figure out how to make his ice come out of like everywhere, right? Or his fire come out of everywhere, right? Because what if we saw Shoto wearing some sort of like ice armor, right? And shooting out fire out of specific places, or, just doing crazy stuff like that. I feel like that's the kind of thing that is probably going to end up being useful against Dabi. And I mean, we've known all along that Shoto's control over ice, him having that ice half is kind of his benefit that he has over Dabi, right? That Dabi has Endeavor level flames or whatever, but the whole reason Shoto was even made or created is so that he too could surpass Endeavor by the fact that he doesn't have to overheat, right? Like, the idea is that his ice side provides him like a perfect cooling system, right? So if he does manage to master that here, that would obviously be another way of surpassing Endeavor and obviously surpassing Dabi, because he doesn't have to worry about burning himself, he doesn't have to worry about someone else burning him, and it really just gives us a better picture at like the mastery of ice and fire that Shoto is working on building here. So from here, going over a few things, we see where Gigantomachia is where he's placed. There's like a facility. It looks like they literally built the facility around wherever he is. I think it also kind of looks like it's literally just in the battlefield, right? Like in the battlefield where he fell asleep, I think that's where he is. A lot of people have been asking like, where's Machia? And Machia, I think, is literally just laying where he was laying, and I think they just built a little triage around him and they're keeping him there. But that also means that, everyone knows where he is, right? Like, he's probably not in a super secret location because I don't think they moved him. Because again, if you look at the panel where he is, you can kind of see destroyed city in the background and like what looks like Shigaraki's decayed ground, like what the ground looks like after Shigaraki decays it. And that's just a good detail to get when you finally have the official chapter out, and it's a little clearer to see, things that aren't so clear to see when you have the pore scans. So just pretty much like last chapter, we had All Might pretty much recapping and telling everybody, here's what you're going to have to go up against, here are the villains you're going to have to deal with, please use this week to plan. And Kaminari seems like he's taking it a little easy with Mineta. Mineta's training is pretty much just doing this, right? Like taking hair out, dropping it. That's all his training is. It's really funny that everyone else is doing all sorts of like craziness, and Mineta's just like, snatching his own wig, just pulling it off while he's sitting down talking to Kaminari. But Kaminari is kind of taking it easy a little bit, right? Like, he's like, well, All For One is kind of nerfed right now, right? Like, Shigaraki is kind of nerfed. Is this really going to be so bad? They don't have Machia? Like, could we have an easy time, finally, like, for once? But Bakugo and Momo obviously ruined that by explaining all the things that the heroes have going for them. Number one being there's no way that they're going to find All For One's hideout. They've never really been able to find All For One himself, just places that he's been. So that's probably going to be out of the question here. Number two is the fact that Shigaraki is closer to complete this time than he was last time. And even though you could definitely make the argument that Shigaraki mainly lost, right, in the Liberation War. And they kind of kept up with Shigaraki, even though he was manhandling a lot of heroes and the way he did Endeavor and the way that he did Ryukyu and everybody, they managed to scrounge together a victory there. But that was with an incomplete Shigaraki, right? Who's probably on a different level than the Shigaraki that we have now, who is like closer to completion. When they finally attack, it's definitely going to be like by the time that everything is settled with that, right? I'm sure All For One's not going to attack while there's still some weakness or anything present there. And that would all be fine and dandy to a certain extent if the heroes kind of all recovered and got back to where they were before the war arc. But we know that that's not the case. We know that actually many heroes have retired or died, or there was just some reason that they aren't returning here. And Momo actually tells us that the heroes have thinned to half their former numbers. So that means there are literally half the heroes around to deal with the same kind of threat from Shigaraki and the Paranormal Liberation Army and all that stuff, when Shigaraki is more powerful and the heroes don't have the element of surprise. Because again, that's number 3 here. All For One is the one that has the element of surprise here. All For One is the one that is going to choose when this battle happens. In the Paranormal Liberation War, the heroes had the benefit of they chose when it was time to attack, right? They surprised the doctor at the hospital, they surprised the villains at the Gunga Mountain Vista or whatever, you know, they surprised the villains at the giant mansion. And everyone was surprised, and that kind of gave the heroes a little bit of a boost. And even with that, they still really struggled. Even with all those things going for them, they still really struggled. I mean, in the beginning, they were kind of washing everyone. Mirko was tearing through the lab. Cementos blowing open the mansion. I mean, they were kind of running through everybody in the beginning. But they eventually ended up having problems because the factor of surprise can only go on so long. Now they're going to have it. So you can only imagine, like, if the heroes are having an easy time in the beginning when the Paranormal Liberation War arc started, because they had the element of surprise, then you can only imagine what's going to happen if the villains got the element of surprise, right? Which is something that I'm sure All For One is not going to let go of, right? And that is, again, a major concern to the students and everyone here, because they're aware that they're really training on borrowed time here, right? Like, everyone is trying to train and do what they can, but at any moment, at any time, whenever, All For One is going to decide when the battle starts. So, moving on from that brings us to the actually really important stuff going on in the chapter, which of course you all know, we've been talking about it this week, is the Aoyama traitor reveal. We have Tooru sitting in the forest. I think she was looking for Aoyama because Aoyama has not smiled, and he hasn't really been part of the class. He hasn't really said anything to Deku ever since the war arc happened and ever since Deku left and came back, right? And it's not so much that she finds it suspicious, it's more so that Tooru obviously really cares about Aoyama, just like most of the class does, because, you know, that's their friend. And if he's not smiling and it's been like a while, it's been like a week and some change, or however long it's been since the war arc, which I believe it's been like a month or a few months or whatever it's been, right? If your friend hasn't smiled that whole time and it's not really being social, and it's like Aoyama, who is like, you know, the kid who's always like, you know, like really weirdly, then I understand like why she is sneaking around in the forest. And unluckily for her, or I guess luckily for her here, she finds out something that I'm sure she really would rather have not been true, right? Which is that Aoyama is a traitor. And we find that out by Aoyama's parents clearly, you know, pretty much trying to convince Aoyama once again to continue following All For One's orders. And we find out that he's been following All For One's orders all this time. He gave the location of the forest training. He gave the location for USJ. Like, he's just been doing all this stuff in the background secretly. And I think in large part, the reason that we haven't seen a whole lot of traitor activity is because All For One was in jail. You know what I mean? Like, he wasn't able to give out commands, and we do kind of get a semblance of that in this chapter, because Aoyama's parents say that he's back giving commands again, right? And that if you don't listen to him, surely he's gonna kill us. And I think that's because All For One is out of jail again and he's able to give commands, and also right now is a good time for him to give commands. So if there's someone hidden within UA that he can kind of take advantage of, I mean, yeah, that's what you're gonna do, so that you can get into UA and get Deku and, you know, end the story. So I obviously think that's a really tough situation to be in for Aoyama. He's, you know, literally a child, and he's put in a situation where his parents' lives are in his control pretty much, and he didn't really ask to be in that situation. He just wanted to feel like everyone else, like he was in the same situation that Deku was in, right? Where he just wanted to be like other people who had quirks, and not necessarily just for the fact of like, I want to have quirks, but it's hard not having a quirk in this world where everyone else does. You know what I mean? Like, we hear about it in the very beginning of the story. I think it's one of the first things we hear, but not everyone is born equal. And Deku and Aoyama are two of the characters who we know were not born equal. Like, they were literally born less than because they didn't have quirks. And in this society, that's a very, very important thing that you need to have. So they both found their ways, obviously, to getting to the point where now they have their quirks. But it's just really interesting to see how Deku obviously took All Might's route to get there, and Aoyama was forced, sadly, to take the All for One path to get there. And it's just like how, you know, there's obviously parallels between Shigaraki and Deku, but it's really interesting how this kind of introduces some really cool parallels between Aoyama and Shigaraki, which I never would have honestly expected those two characters to have similarities. So again, in this section, Aoyama is clearly, you know, I don't want to do this, but I have to do this because I want to keep my parents alive type beat. You know, like, they wanted him to be able to chase his dreams and live a normal life, and All for One kind of just like sneered at them and trampled all over it. And it's kind of messed up that out of all the quirks he could have given Aoyama, he gives him a belly button laser. That's mean. That's really mean. You didn't have to do that. You could have given him anything. You could have given him any cool quirk. Think of all the cool quirks All for One has. He could have given him any one of those cool quirks. And he gave him a belly button laser that doesn't even really work. Like, it's kind of trash. But I kind of understand why he might not have wanted to keep that quirk, because could you imagine just All for One versus All Might during Kamino, and all of a sudden he's like, "You don't know. Prepare yourself for my most powerful attack!" And just shoots a massive beam out of his stomach right at All Might. I feel like that would have been a little... we wouldn't have taken that all that serious, so I kind of get why he would give that one away. So again, this is really framed as Aoyama being forced to be the traitor because he doesn't want his parents to die, and that's a lot of pressure to have, so I kind of get it, right? Like, it's definitely understandable. If you don't want your parents to die, and it's in your control, and it's not supposed to be in your control, I feel like a lot of people would kind of do anything, right? So Aoyama here is conflicted. He loves his friends, he loves the school, he loves, like, all these things, but it's his parents, you know? It's his parents, bro. It's hard to tell someone not to save their parents' lives if they're given the opportunity to do so. And we see that, you know, it pains him. He holds his face. He's literally, like, stretching his face and, like, just losing it, breaking down. But at the end of the day, like, it's his parents. You know what I mean? Like, what are you going to say? It's his parents. He wants to save his parents. And I don't think much is going to get in the way of that. There's going to be much discussion about that. Like, who knows if his parents have, like, that bomb contract quirk going on inside of them that All for One gave Nagant. Who knows if Aoyama himself has that. Like, who knows to what level they can disobey his commands, or to what level he is even aware of them doing that, right? So that is the Aoyama traitor reveal. It seems like Aoyama is absolutely the UA traitor. Horikoshi kind of bait and switched us one week, but, you know, we ended up calling that, I think, a couple years back with the Aoyama traitor theory. I definitely think there were more hints recently, which is what kind of sparked my mind to go back and recover that theory again. And all in all, I'm really happy with how this is turning out. I mean, everyone kind of judged it last week and said it was awful, but this week, clearly we see there's already an improvement, and I think that we're going to see this plotline continue to unfold over the next few weeks in a way that's going to satisfy a lot of people, but, you know, obviously there's no way to satisfy everyone. So the big question for this week is, what do you think is going to happen next? Obviously, I don't think there's about to be a big fight between Aoyama and Deku, but, you know, what if there was? Would the class would get involved? I feel like they would wash Aoyama pretty quick. But his parents are here when this is being revealed. They're on the UA grounds, you know, like, they can't really leave at the moment, or at least his parents can't. So, like, what is going to happen? Are they just going to get caught? Are they just going to get brought in? Is Nezu going to get involved? What is happening here? Please let me know what you think is going to go on in the next chapter and beyond. This has been chapter 336 of My Hero Academia, and just my quick kind of walking over it. I think it's been a really interesting chapter, and honestly, I really like where this traitor reveal is going. But if you disagree, or if you have another opinion about that, please let me know in the comment section below. So this is Pineapple. I'll see you guys later. Shout out to my barber. Peace.